Okay, so where are we up to in the story? We're up to, we discussed Wednesday, the Wednesday last time we met, which was on 2 weeks ago on Sunday. We'll continue. We'll talk about Thursday briefly, and then we go to Friday, which is a big day. If you think about the order of the 6 days of creation, you see that day 4, 5, and 6 is sort of repeating the pattern of day 1, 2, and 3. What do I mean? So day 1, 2, and 3, Sunday you have the creation of the light. Monday you have the separation of heaven and earth. I'm sorry, the waters above in the heaven and the water on earth. And Tuesday is you have the dry land and vegetation. So if you look at 4, not day 4 as continuation after day 3, but day 4 continues, elaborates, and expands day 1. Day 5 elaborates and expands day 2. And day 6 elaborates and expands upon day 3. So think of it as two, almost like two threes, like two triangles. And in that sense, so if Sunday is the creation of light, then on Wednesday we discussed the creation or the setting into motion of the luminaries, the source of light that we know today, the sun and the moon and the stars. So that's sort of an exploration, an expansion of Sunday. And then Monday, which was the separation of the waters that are on earth from the waters that are in heaven, what is the creation? So the expansion of that is Thursday, which we're about to discuss. And Thursday is the creation of the birds and the fish. What are the birds and the fish? The fish are the creations of the water, of the creations of the water that's on the earth, and meaning that they're the inhabitants of the water that's on the earth. And when you look at the birds fly in the expanse of the sky in the atmosphere, which we discussed. The atmosphere is the water that's above the earth. So in that sense, Thursday is an exploration of Monday. And then Friday, we have the creation of the animals, the mammals. You have the creation of the animals, and then you have the creation of the human being, which are the creatures that inhabit the land. And Tuesday was the day that the land appears. So again, Friday is an expansion of Tuesday. And what do we get to that? So the only day that has no partner is, of course, Shabbat, the 7th day. The 7th day is not a continuation of any other day. So the 7th day is the beginning of something new. And that is, of course, the Shabbat, which is the spiritual side of creation, as opposed to the first 6 days, which is more about the physical side of creation. And that's why every day has a primary day, which is 1, 2, 3, and then the expansion of that, which is 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so that's just the introduction to get the overview of what's going to happen on the second set of 3 days. We already discussed Wednesday. Thursday, we mentioned, is the birds and the fish. And then we get to Friday. So we'll get back to Thursday. We'll get back to Thursday another time. We'll go straight to Friday because there's a lot to talk about. We can always go back. That's our model here, and we just want to jump right in. So we'll read Friday a little bit. On Friday, so I'm reading chapter 1, verse 24. I'm going to translate myself because I don't have the English translation in front of me. So I apologize for the imperfect translation. God says, let the earth give forth nefesh chaya, living soul to its kind, animals, insects, beasts to its kind, and it was so. Elohim made the animals to its kind, the beasts, the animals, and all the insects, and God saw that it was good. So again, Vayar Elohim ki tov, God saw it was good. Then you have a very interesting verse 26. Vayomer Elohim, God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man, b'tzalmenu kidmutenu, in our image, in our likeness. V'yirdu, let them rule, b'digat hayam, the fish, they rule over the fish, over the birds, over the beasts, over the animals, and over all the earth. and over all the insects. That's sort of 26. So 26 is the big idea. Let us make man. 27, you have the actual creation where God's plan comes into fruition. By Yivra Elohim, God creates man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them, which is a lot to talk about that verse. And then God says, he blesses them and he tells them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and Yeshua conquer it, rule over the fish, the birds, the beasts that are on the earth. And then human beings want to know, the first question when you hear about the human being, you want to know what's for lunch. What are we going to eat? So right away, it's a strange, I'm saying this as a joke, it's a little strange, but we can talk about it. Right away, God tells the human being what he can eat. The verse says, God blesses them. God says, we said that verse already. Verse 29, God says, behold, I've given to you, it's called Asaph, all the vegetation that is on the earth, the trees and the fruit will be for you for eating, and for all the animals, for all the birds, and for all the insects, can all eat the grass. The Yerek Asaph, the vegetation that the earth gives forth, and it was so. In other words, human being is not allowed to eat a living being at this time. A human being is not allowed to eat an animal or insect. The human being is only allowed to eat the vegetation. God saw, it's called Asher Asa, God saw everything he has done. V'hinei tov ma'od, it was very good. It was evening, it was morning, day 6. Now, these are the verses. There's so much to talk about, but we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere, so that's what we will do. The first verse that we'll discuss is God says, let us make man, which is very strange because it's very different than any other description of any other creation, of any other entity, of any other being. In fact, the introduction, Nasa Adam, God says, who is he talking to? It's a big problem. Who's he talking to? And the bigger problem is that God says in the plural, let us make man. And if God's talking in the plural, it sounds like God needs help, right? The CEO can't do everything on his own. So he tells somebody else, let us make man together as a partnership, which is a big problem because we believe in the fact that there's only one God, monotheism. If God needs help to create the man, so maybe there's another God or another power that God himself needs in order to create the human being. So this is a very problematic verse, so much so that there's a famous story in the Talmud that there was the Greek king, Ptolemy, wanted to get the translation of the Torah, and he wanted a translation of the Torah, but he didn't want it to be, quote unquote, manipulated by the rabbis, because the rabbis, if they control the translation, then they control the information. He wanted to have the authentic version. So he has a fascinating plan. It's a famous story. He takes 70 rabbis, he puts each one in a different room. He doesn't tell them why he's calling them. Each one gets his own office, and then he tells each one, translate for me the Torah of Moses, your teacher. And the idea is that 70 rabbis, if they're all in one room, they could conspire to change certain words to give out the version that they would like. But if they're separated and some of them try to manipulate the translation, then it's going to surface right away. There'll be inconsistencies in the translation. And the Talmud points out that they all did exactly so. They translated the Torah, but they all did change the translation because they didn't want Talmud to make a mistake and get the wrong conclusion. So the rabbis did, in fact, change the translation. And we actually have all 15 places. The Talmud records all 15 places where they changed the Torah for Talmud. And it was, I guess it was a miracle, or maybe it wasn't a miracle. Maybe it was just common sense. So you can look at the version any way you want. Was it a miracle? Was it not a miracle? The bottom line is, the reason why I'm telling you the story, I think we mentioned it before in the first verse, one of the places they changed was this verse, the verse where God says, let us make man, in the plural. They understood that if they translated as written, people are going to think that the king will think that God is multiple gods. Remember, we're talking about translation to Greek, and the Greeks love the idea of multiple gods battling This is what all they write about. So this would sort of give credence to their understanding of theology, and therefore the rabbis, all 70, without conspiring with each other, did in fact do what Talmai was afraid they would do, and they quote unquote mistranslated the Torah. Of course, they mistranslated the translation, but they were loyal to the meaning. And they translated the Torah, not God said, let us make man, but God said, E'ese Adam, let me make man. That is what they did. All I'm telling you the story is to tell you that this is a big problem. This verse is a big problematic verse. In fact, the Talmud says that Moses, when God was dictating the Torah to Moses, and God says, Moses, write, Na'aseh Adam, right, let us make man. So Moses tells God, this is a bad idea. You know, there's always a conflict between the writer and the editor, right? The writer thinks he knows best because he knows what he wants to say, but the editor gets paid to think about not what the writer wants to say, but how the people are going to accept it. And if you read there's always tension between writers and editors. And if the writer and the editor get along too much, that means someone's not doing their job. Either the writer's not doing his job or the editor's not doing the job. So similarly, God has his idea of what the Torah should say, but God is the author, not the editor. Moshe is not the editor either. I'm just saying this as a metaphor. But Moshe is writing the Torah, and Moshe is coming from the perspective of humanity. So Moshe is sensitive to the mistake that this verse may cause. So this is what the Talmud records. The Talmud records that Moshe tells God, this is a bad idea. People are going to make a mistake. And God responds like this, according to the Talmud. God says, Moshe, you write. And the Haroitz Elitos, if anybody wants to make a mistake, let them make a mistake. That's what the Talmud says. Which is strange. It seems like God is creating a situation with free choice where if you want to make a mistake, you can make a mistake. So almost like God is allowing for free choice. If God didn't leave the question, then there'd be no free choice. So God allows for free choice. That's this basic interpretation of the story of the Talmud. But there's another interpretation, deeper interpretation that Rebbe would often say it. I don't know if it was written earlier, but if you look carefully at the words, if you analyze the words that God tells Moshe, you write. And someone who wants to make a mistake will make a mistake. So what's the key word? When we read the statement, we think about it as if somebody wants to make a mistake, we'll allow them to make a mistake to create the free choice. But what the Rebbe said is the person who wants to make a mistake. In other words, the only person who will make a mistake is not somebody who's here with an objective opinion. If you're coming with an open mind and you think about the story with the entire context, you're not going to make a mistake. The only way you'll make a mistake is if you want to make a mistake. If you want to make a mistake, if you're coming with a bias to begin with, then you will make a mistake. So that's very interesting. Often when people say, I don't understand something or I don't like this interpretation, sometimes it's not because of their objective. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's because they're subjective, because they're coming to the question with an agenda. And that's one way of reading what Moshe was saying. Why am I saying all of this? I'm only saying this to tell you, to show that this verse is actually problematic. The two aspects. Number one, why does God say us in the plural? And number two, who's he talking to? Who's he talking to? So there are a few interpretations here. First place we have to check is Rashi. Says Rashi as follows. What God is telling you, what God is telling us is good management. Excuse me just one second. What? My keys? It's in my what's it? Tell me it's in my computer bag. Okay. Okay. So what it's good management skills. There was a friend of ours, and friend of Steve Oster of blessed memory. He just had his yard site a few days ago, 29th of Tammuz. So he would always say the Torah is the best book of management. Because he was in the world of business, he was interested in management, and he said the Torah is the best book of management. And this verse, this Rashi is a case in point. It says Rashi as follows. This is Rashi on chapter 1, verse 26. Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. So first thing Rashi says, it's God's humility. In other words, God realizes there's a problem. What's the problem? The problem is that there are angels. We didn't talk about the angels too much, but the Medrash describes that there are angels, and it's a disagreement when the angels were created. Some people say the angels were created on Monday. Some people say the angels were created on Thursday. We didn't talk about Thursday at length. Maybe we'll get to it next time. But Thursday, the verse says, God says, let there be, that there'll be the water will give forth fish, and then it says va'ofi ofef, and there will be birds flying. Says the Medrash, birds flying could also mean a metaphor for the creatures of the heavens, which are angels. Whatever the angels are, we'll talk about it maybe another time. But the bottom line is there are other beings, spiritual beings in the universe, and the spiritual beings in the universe may become jealous because of the human being, because this human being has certain similarities to the angels, as we will discuss, and therefore the angels will be jealous. And therefore, when God wants to create human beings, he speaks to the angels and he says, "What do you think?" He's asking their advice, not because he needs their advice, but because that's good management. You want to, if you want to eliminate conflict. Just because you're the powerful CEO, you should still ask the people around you for their input, for their advice. And that's what Rashi is saying here. There could be jealousy. You know, some people, you go to the store and you buy yourself a dress, or you buy yourself a tie or a suit, whatever it is, and you come to shul and you sit down and someone has the exact same suit as you have. Someone has the exact same accessory that you have. Someone has the same dress, God forbid. Someone has the same dress as you have, finished, and your day is over. Your high holidays are over, because it creates jealousy. People want to be unique. And the same is true with the angels. The angels want to be unique. And here we have this new creation called human being. And in some ways, the human being is like the angels, as we will discuss. And therefore, they can create jealousy. So the classic interpretation that Rashi gives is when God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us create let us create man. It's not that he needs the help of the angels. He's asking their opinion, not because he needs their opinion, but because that would incorporate harmony in the universe. What's the proof that this is the case? What's the proof that God himself does not need the angels or anybody else to create the human being? What's the proof? So the proof is actually in the Torah, and that's why we say somebody who will make a mistake is because he wants to make a mistake. Because the truth, if you look at the entire context, you will see that the Torah gives you enough information that you should not make the mistake. Where is that? If you look not at verse 26, where God says, let us make man, when it comes to verse 27, where it says God actually created man, there, what does it say? There it says, Vayivra Elohim, God created. It doesn't say God's plural created. It doesn't say God and whoever else he was talking to created. It says God created. So in other words, the verse, we see clearly that when it came to the creation of man, there was no plurality. There was no partnership. It was God himself, the one God, creates man alone. So if God is going to do it alone, why indeed does he have to ask? Why does he have to speak to whoever and say, let us make man, if he can do it alone? So therefore, that is the proof. The verse 27 explains that what verse 26, when verse 26 says, God says, let us make man, it's not that God needs the help, because you see in reality, he doesn't get their help. It's that he's asking their advice. Why is he asking their advice? Because that's good management practice. If you have a company and everybody in all the levels of management are all jealous of each other, then there'll be no harmony and no growth, just infighting and implosion. So therefore, God says, "Let us make man," in the plural, in order to incorporate the perspective of the angels. And if you're a CEO, if you're a manager, you don't want to impose your view. You want to ask people's advice and you want their input. And when they feel that they were consulted with, often they'll accept things that they would not accept if you superimpose it from above. Same thing is with management. If you're running a company, same thing is with raising a family, right? You tell your children what to do, they're not going to want to do it. If you get them to want to do it, they'll do it. They say that the Rebbe said like this. He said that somebody once came to the Rebbe and complained about American Jews, that American Jews are not interested in tradition, they're not interested in Judaism, all they want to do is blend in, and all they want to do is attain material success, and going back to the 1950s. And the person talking to the Rebbe was very pessimistic. And the Rebbe refused to accept the pessimism. And the Rebbe said, no, he really respects American Jews. He says, really, you respect American Jews, but they're going away from Judaism. So the Rebbe says like this. Let's see if I remember that. I remember what he said. The Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe says, American Jews, he says, you can't get them, you can't, what was the language? The exact words. He says, you can't force them to do anything, but you can teach them to do everything. In other words, you can't superimpose what your values are on American Jews or on American youth. But if you explain it, if you consult, if you make it something that they can relate to, then they are just as committed as any other previous generation. And that's a very optimistic view, and that's the view of reality. But that is similar to what God is saying. God is saying we're not going to impose God's perspective on creation, but you need consultation. You need the people to feel that their perspective is being respected. So that's for the plural. Nase Adam, let us make man. Okay, but who's God talking to?
Can you repeat what the Rebbe said again?
So who's God talking to? So one perspective which we mentioned is that God is talking to the angels. Okay, but it doesn't say angels in the verse. So that can't be the only interpretation, because I have not read anything about angels explicitly. There's allusions to angels in the verse, but it doesn't say angels in the verse. So who is God talking to? So here, there's a very interesting interpretation. Interpretation is that really, indeed, God is talking to somebody, and there is plurality. It does say in the plural because there are two dimensions here. On Friday, how does Friday start? Verse 24. Vayomer Elokim, God says, Totzei haaretz, let the earth give forth nefesh chaya leminah, living beings to its kind. In other words, the animals come forth from the earth. Okay, that's how day 6 begins. God says, let the earth give forth. Okay. Verse 26. God says, let us. Who is he talking to? Who's the subject? Who is God talking to? So there's no other mention of anything other than what? Other than the earth. So one way to read the verse is, God is talking to the earth, and God says, let us make man. Who's us? Earth and God. Why does God need earth and God to create the earth? Because there's a deep concept here. The issue, what the verse is conveying is that the human being is he has at least two dimensions within themselves. The human being has two essential drives, and they're very different. And one is earth. A person is a physical person. A person has physical needs, physical drives, physical desires. That comes from the earth. But then a person has a soul. What is the definition of a soul? The definition of a soul is an energy that wants to transcend the material, transcend the physical, and connect to its source and come back to God. And therefore, the human being within themselves, a person could achieve success, could achieve physical success and physical pleasure and physical well-being, and yet the person is still unhappy. Why is the person still unhappy? Because within the human being, there's a soul, and the soul wants to connect to its source. If you're not letting it connect to its source, you're depriving it of oxygen, you're depriving it of what it wants, of a self-expression. So in other words, what are the two forces within the human soul, within the human being? There's the earth aspect, which is the body, and there's the soul aspect, which is part of God. So when God says, "Let us make man," who's he talking to? So there has to be a plural. It says, "Let us" in the plural. Why? Because the human being is not an angel, and he's not earth. What is the human being? When it comes to the animals, it says, "Let the earth give forth a living being," because the point is that an animal. What is an animal? Even though an animal is alive, but an animal is essentially a biological creature. In other words, what does the animal want? Of course, animals have emotions and have feelings, but what do they want? Essentially, what they want what all living creatures want. They want to survive. They want survival. They want pleasure. They want comfort. They want earthly things. The human being, so animals come from the earth. Let the earth give forth. Meaning to say, what are they? They're creatures of the earth. When it comes to the human being is tricky. The human being has an earthly aspect. Part of us, what the Kabbalah calls the animal soul. What does the animal soul want? It wants earth. It wants to survive. It wants to exist. It wants material pleasures, physical pleasures. And that is one drive of the human being, one soul. But then the human being is also a part of God. And therefore, what does the human being really want? The human being wants to connect, transcend, and connect to its source. So therefore, God says in the plural, because who are we talking to? We're talking to, first of all, the earth. And the reason why it says it in plural is because the human being has both dimensions, has an earthly dimension as well as a soul dimension. And that is the dichotomy within the human being. And that's the source of all tension within the human being, all frustration and all tension. If you go back, if you go dig deep enough, I see at least one psychologist on the call. But if you go deep enough, you can really boil down all human tension to the underlying essential tension, subconscious tension between the two aspects of the human being, the body and the soul, the earth and the heaven. And that is what's happening here. And that's why the verse uses the plural. God says, let us make man, to indicate that what you're getting here is not one drive or one creation. You're getting here really a combination of two opposing drives. And that is the story of the human being that plays out throughout the entire Bible, but also throughout the entire human history and throughout each and every person. It all boils down to this verse, which is plural, Naaseh Adam. Why? Because there's not one me, there are two me's. There's not one Menachem Feldman, there are two. There's the earthly part and there's the godly part. And they're very different. And then we have to figure out, how do you make peace and harmony, or at least coexistence? You begin with coexistence, and then you get harmony between the two opposing aspects. But all tension within the human being comes from the fact that at our core, verse 26, which is really the blueprint, where God says, let us make man before the creation. So the blueprint where God envisions what the human being will be, there's already plurality. It's not God. All the other, very interesting, all the other creations, it doesn't say this introduction, and it doesn't say it in the plural, only with the creation of the human being, because the creation of the human being is, in fact, has that plural dimension. Now, because we're talking about Hebrew, I think I see Mark Rosenblatt on the call. If not Mark, it's Kathy. So if Kathy, if it's you, tell Mark about this, because Mark likes the Hebrew. If you look at the verse, the Hebrew language, and you look at the word Adam, which is man, or really human being. So what is the etymology of Adam? What does Adam mean? What does Adam mean? So Adam is a human being. So we have to just make an introduction. All languages are what the philosophers call it's a language that's Heskemi. Heskemi means it's a conventional language. It's by conventional, I mean by convention. What do I mean? I mean to say that people get together and decide to call a certain object, whatever you're going to call it, right? How does the language come? Why do we call the sun the sun? Well, we get it from Greek. But why did the Greeks or the Romans, every language, people get together and they name objects. They say, this will be a book, this will be the sun, this will be the moon, and they just create names. But why is a table a table? Why can't the table be the sun? Who decided that this word, is there an internal connection between the word and the object? Of course not. Because all creations are all languages are man-made. Well, except for Hebrew. Hebrew we call the Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. Why do we call it the holy tongue? Because God, it's a language created by God. If you think about it, God said, let there be light. Well, what language did he say, let there be light? He didn't say it in Japanese, he didn't say it in English. He said it in Hebrew. So Kabbalistically speaking, the Hebrew letters and the Hebrew language is really, it really expresses the core of what that object actually is. So there is indeed a deep connection between the name and the object. And case in point is Adam, man, or human being. What is the etymology of the human being? What is the etymology of that word? And that will really tell us the definition of that word. So what's fascinating is, just like we said, the human being is really not one definition. A human being has two definitions, and that's why it says plural, let us make man, because who makes man? Man is both earth and part of God. So that expresses itself in the actual word Adam. What does Adam mean? So one interpretation is Adam comes from the word Adama, earth. But I know it's not like a very name to, it's not a name to brag. You say, you come home and your mother says, what did you learn in the school today? She says, I learned the meaning of man. What's the meaning of man? Earth. Well, that's not very inspiring, right? Because I thought I'm a human being, I'm more advanced. No, I'm earth. What it's telling you is, what is Adam? Adam is from the earth. In fact, the verse tells a story. If we read, it's not in this section, but we'll talk about this at great length. The entire story of creation, or certain parts of the story of creation, are elaborated again in chapter 2. And in chapter 2, you hear the detailed story. Here, you just get the general story. And when you read the detailed story, you see that God actually creates the human being, man, Adam, from the earth, and then he blows within the human being, he blows into his nostrils a soul. So literally, and then the verse says, God calls man Adam. Let's find the verse so you don't have to make things up. We'll find a verse. Verse 7 in chapter 2, God, Hashem Elohim, two names of God, formed Adam, man, Afar, earth, min ha'adama, from the earth, sand from the earth, dust of the earth. Now, in the English, it doesn't work, but in Hebrew, you see it very clear. It says, Hashem Elohim formed Adam from the Adama. Adam is man, Adama is earth. So what's the etymology of the word Adam? Adam means from the earth. Very simple. That's who I am. So you say, what's the definition of a human being? We're from the earth. We're just an earthly being. That is one definition. And it's a true definition because that's part of us. But that's not the entire story. Why is that not the entire story? Because there's another definition of source for where the word Adam comes from, where the word human being comes from. And the other definition is what? Is Adama, is Adameh. Adameh, this is a Kabbalistic definition, but it's a definition. Adameh means I am similar. And it evokes a verse that says, Adameh le'elyon, I am similar to the one above. But what is the human being? The human being is a creation that is most similar to the one above, most similar to heaven. And in what ways is similar to heaven, we'll discuss in a minute. But you have one word that conveys or expresses two opposing truths. I mean two truths that are on opposite sides of the spectrum, two opposite poles. On one hand, you say the human being is Adama, he's earth. On the other hand, you say he's similar to the one above, he's similar to the divine. So which one is it? Are we earth or are we similar to the divine? You have to make up your mind. And the answer is you don't have to make up your mind, because if you're a human being, you are a combination of these two drives. You're a combination of an earthly drive that wants to survive and wants to have a material, physical existence. And then you're also a combination of a part of you is the energy, the soul, the spark, call it what you want. And that is all it wants to do, is be similar to the divine, because it is part of the divine. It is part of God. And therefore, you have both those aspects within yourself. There's going to be a certain tension, and living life is not about dissolving this tension. In other words, you have to channel the tension and ride the tension and live the tension. But if you're just going to ignore one part of yourself, if you suppress either the earthly part or the divine part, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to need to pay, not the rabbi. You're going to have to pay the shrink. But if you learn to manage the both opposing drives, then you live life to the fullest. So that's a little bit on the plurality of this verse. Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. Who's us? One interpretation, like I said, is God is consulting the angels. The other interpretation is God is talking to the earth. And in other words, he needs the raw material of the earth, because that's not the defining, but a defining character of the human being is we're earth, we're physical. But that's not the only defining character of the human being, and therefore it says plural, let us make man. Us is plural, is God himself as well. So that's one idea. A lot more to talk about, but okay, one more point is as follows. One more point is that when it talks about, in verse 26, God says, let us make man, Naseh Adam. And we mentioned that Naseh Adam is plural, but we're not done with the plural. It says as follows, let us make man, Bitzalmeinu Kidmutenu, in our image, in our likeness. So you have two expressions, in our image, in our likeness, which sounds the same, which seems very similar. Kidmutenu means that he's like us, and B'Tselmenu means in our image. So there's a lot of questions on this verse. What does this mean? God says, let us make man in our image. I thought God doesn't have an image, but let's just stay on the theme of the plurality for a moment. Why does it say twice? B'Tselmenu kidmutenu, in our image, in our likeness. Why does it say twice? So one interpretation is the reason why it says it twice is, again, because we're talking to the earth. And when we say in our image, God is referring to the image of God. And then when he says kidmutenu, in our likeness, he's referring to the earth because the human being is likened to the earth. In some sense, we're physical creatures, but in another sense, we are spiritual creatures. Okay. What does it mean in our image? So there are many, many interpretations. The problem, the axiom is that God has no image. So if God has no image, what does it mean that the human being is created in a divine image if there is no divine image? So what does it mean? It means that God has an eyes, ears, nose, mouth. God doesn't have any of this. So what does it mean in our image? So all the commentaries agree that we're talking about something not physical but spiritual. And what is it that makes it like God, makes us like God? There are various interpretations, but the most common interpretation is that we are like God. The most important part that makes us like God is that we have free choice. The only creatures, the only beings, I don't want to name anybody, name the beings. In other words, the only things in this universe that have free choice is God and the human being. Nothing else has free choice. All creations follow nature, follow their nature. All animals follow instinct. So what is the definition of the human being other than we're from the earth? We have an animalistic side, meaning part of us also wants to follow instinct. But what makes us human? What makes us that we are in God's likeness? We are in God's image. So being in God's image means you're like God. In what sense? I can create? No, I can't create. But just like God is free and he can do whatever he wants, I too am free. I have free choice. I can do whatever I want. Now, it doesn't mean I can do whatever I want. It doesn't mean I'm not like God in the sense that God transcends time and space. God can do anything. I can't do anything. For example, I have certain physical limitations. One that comes to mind is I don't think I could play on the NFL. I don't think I'm tall enough. I don't think I'm broad enough. I don't think I'm strong enough. I just can't do it. So what does it mean? I can do anything I want. You know, the mother tells the child mother wants the child to be ambitious. So mother tells the child, you can be anything you want to be. Well, I don't think that's true. I don't know that that's true. So you can't be anything you want to be. There are certain things you can be, certain things you can't be. So what does it mean that we have free choice? What does it mean that we're free? So what freedom means we have moral freedom. In other words, I can't change my physical nature, but I could change my moral choices. In other words, all other creations, if this is my nature, if this is my instinct, if I want to pounce on that animal and prey upon that animal, if I want to do it, I have to do it. If I am a creature, if I'm an animal, if I'm any other creation of the earth, because that's the way I was created. I have those instincts and I cannot liberate myself of those instincts. And because I can't, there's no question of morality. Is it moral that in the jungle, the more powerful animal preys on the weaker animal? Of course not. That's its instinct. That's what it's supposed to do. And it's not free. When I say the human being is in the image of God, that the human being has freedom, it doesn't mean freedom to do whatever you want. It means I can't do anything. It's certain things I can't do. But it means that when it comes to moral choice, here I'm free. I have an instinct to do something. I am able to say, I'm not going to do it. Now, in the current climate, in the modern world, free choice of the human being is under attack. Many great theories tell you that the human being is not free. And Judaism, where we reject that outright, because if we don't have free choice, then there's no question of morality, right? The whole idea of morality is that you have a choice. If you have no choice, there's no morality. And if there's no choice, there's no morality, there's no purpose to existence. So the Judaism is unequivocal that the person has free choice and the person is free to make that choice. And that freedom is what the verse means, or at least one interpretation of what the verse means when the verse says, let us make man in our image. And our image means we're like God in the sense that we're like God in the sense that we could become we are free. We're not trapped by our instincts, but we can actually overcome them and channel them and change them. We are in control of the animal within. We are in control of the instincts, and the instincts are not in control of us. So that's the other element of this verse. Important element here is the idea of free choice embedded within the first verse that describes the creation of the human being. Okay, there's a lot more to talk about. But if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question, now is a good time. Otherwise, we continue on our journey.
Rabbi, I have a quick question about what you just said. So when you say it's under attack, meaning people saying that they're not responsible for their choices, is that what you mean?
I think I'm losing you, Beth.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
I said, when you say it's under attack now, do you mean that people are trying not to take responsibility for their moral choices? Is that what you mean? Or what do you mean precisely?
I mean to say that you know better than I, because you're a psychologist, that there are theories that would say that a person is basically a product of either their environment or just the way their nature. And if a person is if a person grows up in a certain environment, they're forced to make certain choices. And therefore, if they make those choices that are negative choices, you can't hold it against them because that's the environment they grew up in. And in some sense, if someone says, well, because I was traumatized as a child, that excuses anything I will do. And if that's the case, then there's no morality. In other words, there's no concept of reward and punishment, because I went and I killed someone. So you say, why did you do it? I say something about my upbringing or something about my nature or my nurture, something about that forces me to act this way. And if I'm forced to act this way, then who are you to punish me for it? Because you're not going to punish the animal for preying upon the weaker animal. I remember the first time I saw, the cats were always very cute animals. And the first time I saw like a cat preying on a bird, and the bird literally in the cat's mouth, and it's moving its feathers. It was horrible. I could never look at cats the same way. And then I realized that there's nothing wrong with that. That's its nature. So some people would say when a person does something wrong, it's you can't blame the person, because the person is just acting out upon the way, either something in their chemical makeup or something in their environment or the way they were brought up. And you can't really blame people for doing things that are wrong, because for following their instincts, because they're forced to do so. And if they're forced to do so, they have no moral responsibility. If they have no moral responsibility, there could be no justice, no law and order, no justice at all. And in fact, Judaism agrees that if somebody is indeed mentally incompetent, this is not Judaism today, thousands of years ago, Judaism says that if somebody's mentally incompetent, they're not obligated in any parts of the Torah. Fascinating laws. So let's say somebody is mentally incompetent and they're a billionaire. They inherited $1 billion and they go to your house and they burn down your house. So could you sue their estates and could you collect money from their estates? I'll tell you a surprising law. The Torah says you can't, right? Because only somebody who's mentally competent can be held accountable. If somebody is not mentally competent, they can't be held accountable, because they have no free choice. If someone's not mentally competent, they don't have free choice. But if somebody's a healthy human being, here, if you believe that so there's two ways to look at it. One way to look at it is a person is a product of their environment or their upbringing or their mental makeup or their chemical makeup, and they have no choice. And therefore, if they have an instinct to rob a bank, they're going to rob a bank. If that's the case, you can't hold anybody accountable. But if you come from the Torah's perspective, where you understand there's free choice doesn't mean you don't have an instinct to rob the bank, but free choice means that you have the capacity to overcome your instincts. And therefore, if I don't, I'm held accountable. If I don't, there's morality. And so that's a prerequisite for morality, because morality assumes that a person has the choice. If there's no choice, how could God tell me, thou shalt not kill, if I don't have a choice whether or not I'm going to kill?
Rabbi, could you
I didn't hear what you said, but I see on the question you posted, right? You want to know what the Rebbe said about American Jews. So
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact phrase, but it was something to the extent that you can't force them to do anything, but you can teach them to do anything. Everything, anything. You can't force them to do anything, but you can teach them to do everything. And the point is, with American Jews, you have to, you can't superimpose. People have to understand. In the shtetl, people did something because it was tradition, right? You watch Fiddler on the Roof, and you know that why do we do what we do? It's tradition. What does tradition mean? You do it because it was done. But in America, that doesn't work. But that doesn't mean people are not interested in Judaism. What it means is you have to take the time, expose people to the meaning and to the depth, and then they'll do everything. But you have to teach. You can't superimpose.
Rabbi,
Yes.
can I ask a question? I'm trying to understand all those steps from the point of view of perpetual creation. So we're discussing the initial one, but going forward, like every
Right.
single moment, everything is recreated. So from the point of partnership between Hashem and man, can we understand that let us make man is the sign of partnership going forward? And what other steps also was every single moment, the process was similar?
I think the partnership between human being and man, we'll discuss that later. I think that verse alludes to it later. I don't think it's discussed now. I think that verse 27, when you talk about the essence of man, what you're talking about is what is our makeup? What's our DNA? What's our core? What's our spiritual core? And that is ongoing because who we are on a continuous basis is always two. There's always a plurality of who we are. There's the earthly side of self and there's the godly side of self. And those two, and continuously we have both elements of those two extremes within us, within our psychological makeup. And those two are basically each pulling us to another direction. And that's the source of all tension, and that's ongoing. So if ongoing, the ongoing aspect is the mix, the ingredients of the opposing ingredients that make up the human psyche.
And the same applies to all the other steps of creation.
Yeah, because
everything is seated in here.
I think so. I think so.
Thank you.
Rabbi?
Yes.
One question about, what you were saying about a person who's mentally ill. So, and let's say the case, and where they then aren't held to a moral standard because of that. So let's say in the case of that Hanukkah attack, where they claim that the person who came in and killed the rabbi and injured people was mentally ill. So do we consider him like a person who is a threat to society and so should be put to death because he's like somebody chasing somebody and so you should...
That's a good question. That's a good question. That's a good question. Would you let the mentally ill person run around the street, or you have to put him to protect the population? You're right. You would have to put him and protect the population. But the point is that when the Torah says a person does something, you can't bill him for the burning down the house. That means the Torah says this person has no moral choice, has no free choice, and therefore you can't hold him accountable. Now, you can protect yourself, but you can't hold him accountable. Now, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't know psychology, and I don't know that there's a big field here. You know, in America, they have something called temporary insanity defense. It's wonderful. I was normal a minute before I pulled the trigger. I'm normal a minute after I pulled the trigger. And if I pull the trigger, I'm crazy at that moment because everyone agrees that killing people is crazy. So I'm not telling you that I know who's in the category of mentally incompetent. And I don't think the Torah defines it because it all depends on the knowledge of the time. You know, just like with medicine, the Torah says, go to the doctor will heal. Well, what formula will the doctor use to heal? Well, whatever the medical science knows at the time. So the same things with mental incompetence. Whatever science tells you is mentally incompetent, that's what it is. Now, of course, you have to be insane to believe in mental insanity, but in temporary insanity. The person who killed Ari Halberstam, who's Chani's cousin, on the Brooklyn Bridge. If you ever traveled from the Brooklyn Bridge, you see all the signs of the Ari Halberstam signs. So I remember I was during his trial, the defense was that the person, you can't hold him accountable because he grew up in Lebanon and he was taught to hate the Jews. So therefore he shot up a van of Jews because that's what he was taught. So you see the danger of, if you say that a person is trapped by their environment or by their upbringing, and then it's not their choice to change it, then a person says, well, I was taught to hate, so I'm going to go hate, I'm going to go kill. And then what do you want from me? I had no choice to overcome that. So it's actually a very dangerous path to follow this idea and say that a person is really a product of their environment or their nature, and they can't change it. And we're not saying that a person doesn't have instincts or a person's not influenced by their upbringing. That would be false. Of course, the person has very strong influence from the childhood traumas, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the question. The question is, does the person have the ability to overcome that? Does the person have the ability to overcome their instincts, or are they trapped by their instincts? And this is not just a philosophical discussion, because it has ramifications to himself. I have instincts to do something negative, do something destructive. Whether or not I believe I can overcome it is critical to my ability to overcome it. If I don't believe I can, I won't be able to do so. If I believe I can, then there's a chance that I will. But what the Torah is saying, that's what makes me human. What makes me human is not that I have intelligence. Maybe I do have intelligence, but that's not what makes me human. What makes me human is the fact that I'm in God's image. What does it mean I'm in God's image? By this definition, I have free choice. I'm not trapped by my instincts. And we're unique in that sense. We're the only creatures. Only us and God are free. The angels aren't free. The animals aren't free. The laws of gravity is not free. The speed of light is not free. Everything operates exactly according to its nature. The only person that we insist, again, this philosophy, as far as I know, is under attack. But what we believe, the only thing we insist is actually free is God and people. And the only reason why we're free is not because we're so great, it's because we have a spark of God within us, and that keeps us free. So this is very important, it's very critical, because if I believe I'm trapped in my instincts, then I won't be able to overcome my instincts. And then I live a very animalistic existence. Animals are wonderful creatures, but they don't overcome their instincts. Okay, 5 minutes left. 4 minutes left. We want to talk about, there's a lot to talk about. I want to talk about verse 26, the wonderful verse. Actually, verse 27, wonderful verse. This can open up a whole discussion, but I don't know how much we can get into it now, because we'll also have to address the way these verses plays out in chapter 2, when you have the elaboration. But everything starts from the grammar. When you realize that the Torah is written in a way that is not grammatically sound, in other words, there's a mistake, there seems to be questions, then you know there's a lot of insight here. So for example, if you would write verse 27 in your grade school, you would lose points because it's not grammatically accurate. What does verse 27 read? God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. That's singular, male. He created him. Male and female, he created them. What does this mean? God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them. He created him. Male and female, he created them. What's happening? Now, all over the first time God says, the only time the verse says explicitly that God created male and female is with the creation of the human being. It's not to say that the animals were not created male and female. Obviously they were, but there's no emphasis on the male and female aspects. What does the Torah say with the animals? The animal, it says, when it comes to the animals or everything else, it says, limina, to its species, to its kind. Meaning to say that God is creating many species. That's one interpretation. But it also means God creates the creation with the animal with the ability to perpetuate the species. And if you're going to perpetuate the species, if you're going to perpetuate the species, you're going to need male and female. But doesn't say male and female explicitly. When it comes to the human being, it says God creates him, male and female, he created them. So there's the grammatical problem. Did he create him or did he create them? So we'll talk about it another time. But there's something here about male and female, he created them, meaning to say that there's something about the union of male and female amongst the human beings that is much deeper than the union of male and female amongst animals. So when it comes to animals, primarily, there may be a few exceptions, but primarily, why do the animals mate? The animals mate for the perpetuation of the species. That's why animals mate. But with the human beings, that's not why human beings mate. Human beings mate for many other reasons. In other words, the connection to male and female is much deeper than just to perpetuate the species. And that's unique to the human being. And that's why the Torah says in the first verse, God created man. And what does it say about the man? Male and female, he created them. There's something unique about the union of male and female within the human being, which is much more than much more, and therefore it's emphasized over all other creations, where the union between male and female and other creations is primarily just for to perpetuate the species. Here, there's something much deeper. And what is it? What's much deeper about this? So one way to think about this, I know this is a little bit radical, but one way to think about this is the same verse. The verse says, God created man in his image, meaning to say, within the human being, there's a spark of God. There's the godly part of myself. Now the question is, how do I tap in to the godly part of self? And one answer is through the connection of male and female, right? That's what the verse says. The verse says, God creates man. Let's find the verse. Verse 27. God creates man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. So it's emphasized twice. The image of God, he created him. And then immediately after the image of God, he created him, what does it say? Male and female, he created them. Well, what do I have to know is male and female? So one way to say it, the way you tap into this one way, or an important way, tap into the spark of God within themselves, is with the relationship with male and female. And what does that even mean? So there's all kinds of interpretations. One interpretation is that where does a human being learn to connect to somebody else, to transcend their own needs and connect and connect intimately to somebody else? That's through the male and female union. That's through marriage. And that teaches the person how to do the same, how to connect to something outside of him, to connect to God. So the union between male and female is really a metaphor for the union between God and the Jewish people. There's a very famous Jewish book about 1,000 years old, Reishis Chachma, which is it's a book that really is a very spiritual book and demands of people to live a spiritual life. And it seems like it's actually against physical pleasures. But there it says a very fascinating statement. It says that a person who doesn't know the love of a woman will never know the love of God, because the commitment and the love and the yearning and the longing between male and female is a metaphor, and it teaches the person how to have that union and that bond with Hashem. So one way, this is one interpretation, one way where you can find that Tselem Elokim, the image of God, is by having a healthy union between male and female. Why am I saying this? There are many other interpretations of this verse. We'll elaborate upon it next week. I'm only saying this is a plug because the rabbi is always selling something. I'm saying this is a plug for Wednesday morning. We're going to do Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which is basically a romantic love story between a young man and a young woman. And of course, the reason why it's in the Bible and the reason why it's holy is because it's a metaphor for the bond between the God and the bride, the Jewish people. And one way to tap in to our Spirit of God who's within us is to understand the male-female relationship and understand that as a metaphor for the relationship between the people and God. So put it on your calendar, Wednesday morning, 9:30, Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. And hopefully we'll enjoy that. Thank you for joining this morning. It's been my pleasure. If anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comments,
Rabbi,
please go right ahead. Go ahead.
I could that refer to the fact that we all possess masculine and feminine traits? The intuitive side is the feminine, and the masculine is the linear and analytical. And also, I seem to recall you reading about Lilith. Is this where that comes from?
I have to apologize, Ken. I wasn't able to hear. One of the reasons why I wasn't able to hear is because I'm in Brooklyn at my parents' home, and we had a simcha on Shabbos with my sister Shara Brachas, and literally, thank God, we have a house full of kids, and right outside the door, there's a house full of kids. So I had a little trouble hearing. So if I can burden you to repeat it again, I apologize in advance, but I literally cannot hear. My apologies.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I think that expression, male and female, each of us has feminine and masculine traits within us. So maybe that's what it refers to. Also, I recall years ago reading about Lilith. Is this where that comes from?
What's the second point?
Lilith. You know who Lilith is?
Oh, Lilith. No, Lilith doesn't come from here. Lilith we'll read about later. We'll read about Lilith later, but male and female, Ken is right. Ken is right that according to the Kabbalah, okay, we have to go back a little. Ken wants to take me to the Kabbalah. Fine. Ken, okay, we'll do Kabbalah. One of the interpretations of we're created in the image of God. So the interpretation I offered earlier was the more classic interpretation. The classic interpretation is, but there's also a Kabbalistic interpretation. The Kabbalistic interpretation is that just like we have what they call 10 sfirot, we have 10 attributes. Just like God has 10 attributes, and according to the Kabbalah, based on verses in the Torah, there are 10 attributes that God has, sfirot. We discussed this at great length in the beginning of Corona. We had a few classes on the 10 sfirot, but in short, sfirot means that the God has 10 ways of expressing himself, and the human soul is also created in the image of God, meaning to say, we too, our soul is also made up of those 10 soul powers. Fine. So that's the meaning of that we are created in God's image from the Kabbalistic perspective. Now, once you go into the 10 sfirot, happens to be that some of those 10 sfirot are masculine and some are feminine. And one way to think about this is that within God, there's also some of the sfirot are masculine and feminine. And within God, there's a merging of the masculine and feminine aspects, and that's the marriage. And Kabbalistically speaking, I'm just saying it sounds, we don't have the time to elaborate it, but when you do a mitzvah, Kabbalistically, what you're really doing is you're creating the marriage within God, the divine energy, between the masculine elements and the feminine elements, meaning to say that's a simple English of saying you're drawing down the light from God into the parts of God that express it into this world. That's the feminine aspect, the aspect of expression. And the same is true within the human being. We too have the masculine element and the feminine element. And when we unite our masculine and feminine elements, one thing, what we're actually connecting to that masculine and feminine energy within God. And the same thing is within the person. But then the same is true when you have a physical union between man and woman, an intimate physical union between man and woman. According to the Kabbalah, that elicits the union between the masculine elements of God, which is the divine light, and the feminine element of God, which is the capacity to express that light in this world. And when you do have that physical union, it triggers the spiritual union, which brings about energy and blessing into this world. That's why, from the Kabbalistic perspective, the active union between male and female is in fact a very holy and spiritual experience if it's done properly. And just like when you have a union between male and female, you have the potential to create new life. Every union between male and female, even if there's no physical offsprings, but there's certainly spiritual offsprings, and that brings a new energy into the universe. But that's a whole new discussion, a lot to talk about, but you're absolutely correct from the Kabbalistic perspective. We have masculine and feminine within ourselves. And then there's masculine and feminine between physical male and physical female. And when we connect to those to the other person, we're really creating a union between the various energies within God, and that brings down the light into this world. We mentioned it before. I'm just going to mention it briefly, even though we don't have that much time to elaborate. But we said in the Hebrew, Ish and Isha, man and woman. The letters of man and woman are very much the same. Ish has Aleph Shin. Man has the letters Aleph and Shin. Woman has the letters Aleph and Shin, which is fire, fire. Man has fire. Woman has fire. Ish has one more letter, which is Yud. And Isha has one more letter, which is Hey. Yud, Hey is the letters of God's name. And man and woman each have an aspect of God's name within themselves, but it's not really God's name until you get the two letters to unite. So if my Yud can unite with the woman's Hey, then you have Yud Hey, that's God's name. So the point of the matter is that there's a certain aspect of God within yourself, but the true exploration of and the true tapping into that divine energy within yourself, the true potential, in other words, the ultimate potential, is within the context of a healthy marriage. A lot to talk about on this, but it is fascinating stuff. So we'll continue, we'll elaborate. Remind me, Ken, next week. Don't let me forget about it because my memory is a little shaky.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, everybody should have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. And it's good to see you as always. Be well. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yashiko.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yes.
We got your comment, Beth, that of course what I said when I say the psychologists disagree with free choice, I didn't mean all of them, but I mean it certainly is debated. And certainly the people that want attention are talk about if you attack free choice, you make some waves, make some headlines. So that's the more vocal group. But of course, yes, indeed, it is hotly debated and hotly contested. Indeed. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Rabbi Yashiko.
Thank you. Be well.